Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out this morning. We're going to get a few more people through the course of today, and welcome to the second day of branded content. My name is Morgan Holt. I'm the chairman of the Branded Content Marketing Association. I'm not going to stand up here and talk for any longer than to welcome our two speakers for today, Cliff Fluet and Adam Hillyer. They'll introduce themselves, but Cliff Fluet is something of a supremo in legal and branded content and understanding the roadmap, which is the title of today's session. Adam is Global Marketing Services Director for Bacardi, and if anyone knows how a brand copes with these things, then he does. So I'm going to hand over to Cliff, who's going to talk through the roadmap for branded content and how to avoid some of the potholes in the road. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Morgan. Just see if we can get that on the screen. Thank you very much indeed for coming out so early, to be 9 a.m. on the in the dying days of MIPTV. Very, very pleased to see you this morning as well. We're here, Adam and I, to talk about the legal and commercial roadmap for branded content deals. I think one of the things that we see day in, day out is that actually the world of branded content is extraordinarily important, which is why we're here. This is why the summit is being held. But the road to getting these deals away is, quite a difficult one. So, as Morgan said, my name's Cliff. I'm a partner at the law firm Silkin. Silkin is seen as industry leaders in the world of advertising, and they're founder member of the Global Advertising Lawyers Association. But we are working increasingly in the worlds that I work in. My background is in the world of digital media and branded entertainment and where they converge. Adam.
And good morning again. My name's Adam Hillyer. I am feeding back horribly. I work for Bacardi, for Bacardi Global Brands, which is the global marketing arm of Bacardi. So our role essentially is to provide the assets to support our global programs. And within that office, I look after the marketing services team. And essentially, amongst many other things, my role is to make sure that the commercial and legal framework for the deals that we're putting in place work as best as they can.
So this morning's session, we were asked to cover a number of themes. And what we're going to focus on this morning are brief introductions to why branded content in the context of what we do. What's the roadmap of a typical deal? Where do the crises and the pinch points occur? Because we do see a lot of them, I'm afraid. And we'll give you our take on what is an ideal roadmap as well, and where you can find a trusted guide. And we're going to leave a few minutes at the end for any questions that you have for either of us too. One of the things I just want to point out is that in no way, shape or form am I saying that all deals are the same or that there is one way to do a deal. I think the one consistent theme that you'll hear from us is that there is no consistency, but there are some consistent themes, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And also as well, what I'm going to do to a certain extent is exaggerate to prove some points, and by no means is any of this to do with Bacardi or any particular deals out there as well. I think one will find that these themes are universal through the industry, not just to any particular company. So Adam's going to start off with why Bacardi loves branded content.
So I'll make a rather obvious statement to start with, which is consumers want more from their brands. One thing that we most definitely realise is that in this day and age, in terms of the muddled media landscape, consumers want their brands to speak to them, and they want to be able to speak to their brands. And we want consumers to love us. For Bacardi particularly, our requirements moved past awareness. Awareness isn't something that Bacardi as a brand fundamentally struggles with. What we want to move on to the next level. We want to move into greater affinity, engagement, and ultimately advocacy. Advocacy from the consumer so that they drink our brands, but also that they recommend the brands to their friends, to their family. Now, content for us does this in a particularly effortless way. We have to make extra efforts to make sure that when we're driving engagement and advocacy, we've got to try very hard. You guys do this every day of the week in a much more effortless manner. The challenge for us is that the engagement, the content that you provide and the engagement it provides has to be about the brand personality. It can't be disparate from the brand personality. And that, for me, is the big challenge. That's the challenge that we're focusing on in the next few years.
And from a business perspective, and I'm talking about from a business making perspective as well, the great news about branded content is that it can save costs. In a world where both the CFO and the CMO are looking for greater efficiencies, what you have here in branded content is the opportunity to capture media on a multi-platform, transmedia way in one effortless way and push it out over several platforms as opposed to creating several different siloed pieces of content. It can also generate revenue. What you've got now is that rather than marketing just being seen as a cost, we have a way that can generate sales by way of music downloads, can generate longer term revenue by way of music publishing royalties, or actually in terms of syndicated formats or programming can actually generate cash. Some of my clients, their biggest issue with branded content is a check arrives and they don't quite know where to post it. So some great news there. And beyond, to Adam's point as well, about building, protecting and establishing brand equity and that deeper awareness is why everybody wants to be in this space. But the real opportunity that I want to touch point and what we're going to talk about in terms of doing these deals is that there used to be quite a master and servant mentality in putting these deals together. I will buy this content or you will work for me. What we do have now is much more of a partnership role between rights owners and brands, where actually brands need rights owners as much as rights owners need brands. So it becomes less about holding each party to ransom and more about working in unison. And for the deal, it means that you can work in ways that only a few years ago one could ever have dreamt of as well. We'll find that the key to these deals, however, is a mental model of working together and working together in a different way, being flexible, being innovative, being open and transparent. Now, all of that may seem terribly obvious, but for many people entering into this space, that isn't how they've worked in the past, and they need to find some trusted guides. So here is our distillation of the classic branded content deal, where someone has a fantastic idea and gets some sell-in at the brand, and then runs off and negotiates and agrees the points, the main terms. They'll then go to a business affairs person or an external counsel and say, paper the deal, structure it for us, as it were, work out what rights we get, then we'll work out what our objectives are, and then we'll try and find how it can be relevant for our brand. Now, our view of this is that this is the suboptimal way forward. It's a common way forward, but it is a suboptimal way forward. Because what happens is the parties get into a muddle. So one of the classic areas that have been the preserve over the last few years have been music and brand partnerships, which have then bled into AFP deals. And I just want to walk you through sort of the diary of a classic music and brand partnership. So someone has a fantastic idea of working with a great new artist, great new male artist by the name of Perry Katie, and says, you know what, he'd be great for that lifestyle brand. I've got a mate who knows Perry Katie, let's go and get him on board. So they pitch it to the brand, it's £1 million. It's a £1 million deal, we'll get the buy-in, that's right, off we go. So we'll go and approach the brand manager and say, brand manager says, you know what, how much have we got? And the brand goes, £1 million. Great, deal done, everybody happy. Let's go to the lawyers to get it papered. So then we get to this point about the structure, and then the lawyer says, right, it's £1 million. What for? Who do we need to speak to? Who do we need to clear? Oh, there's a record label involved. Oh, there's a music publisher involved. Oh, there's a tour promoter involved. So then you'll go to those guys, and each of them will say, how much is the other guy getting? Then all of a sudden, I want as much as he's getting, or he's not getting more than me. Everybody wants a piece. Everybody is, expectations are mismanaged. So the lawyer goes back to the client and say, bad news, everyone. No one's going to do this deal unless they get £500,000 each. It's now £2 million. Brand has to decide, do we go forward or do we go back? Well, actually, do you know what? We'll go forward, but we'll take the money from the activation and we'll take some money out of the agency fee. All of a sudden, the brand partnership is starting to wobble. All of a sudden, you are getting a lack of trust. You are getting a position where actually, because everybody's ending up with less, the label says, yeah, you know what, but I'm only going to give you rights to North America and I'm only going to give you another territory. The publisher says, I'm only going to give you online and above-the-line rights for 6 weeks. And the artist says, I'm not so sure about this anymore. This was a £1 million deal, and now it's £500,000. So what I'm going to do now is say, any activation that we do from the brand, I have to have approval over. So we have a death by 1,000 cuts. The brand partnership takes place, not quite as wide-ranging, groundbreaking, multi-platform or transmedia as anybody thought it would be. and then someone really senior within the brand says, you know what, never again. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen that or experienced that. Regrettably, it's something that we've observed quite a lot, actually. So this is what we think is the suboptimal roadmap. Now, in the world of advertiser-funded programming, well, I'm not going to say it's even worse, but it's certainly more complex. You have a greater number of complexity and working parts. You get real tensions between production companies and broadcasters, producers, agencies, brands and brokers. Each party is going into branded content that it's going to be their new way forward. It's the new way of doing business. This is our new strategy. We're into formats. We're into IP ownership. We're into revenues. And what happens to be is that because everybody's looking for this new business, but at the same time, nobody wants to create any precedents. So it's a very tense kind of deal. And because people aren't quite sure where they're going, they become, in my view, slightly too obsessed with the issues of control rather than opportunities and revenues. Who's going to own the format rights? What are the windows? How are video on demand rights going to be? How is media going to be? All cause significant tension in these kinds of deals. People don't really consider at the outset talent rights and what rights the broadcasters are going to need. And one of the biggest issues, certainly in the UK with regard to advertiser-funded programming, is that one can be spending a very significant seven-figure sum without any guarantee or obligation on the broadcaster to play the content out. So you have a number of tense issues in these negotiations in this world of branded content. So a more classic roadmap is one where people have a fantastic idea, but then actually really focus on what is the relevance of the campaign. They'll still go away and enter a procurement and negotiation process in a more considered way. Once that negotiation is complete, they'll come to a lawyer or a business affairs person to look at the structure, get the best rights, and then seek the opportunity. Now, Adam and I are going to focus on the key points where these deals fall over, and we've identified them into 5 by no means exclusive headings of structures and the stakeholders, who's going to do what are the fees going to be, how does the negotiation go, and what is the issues with regard to approval and consent. So the stakeholders and structures points where these crises and these pinch points can take place are multifarious. I'm just going to touch on a few of them. Who's going to own the branded content? Who's going to retain some element of control? It's quite simple that a production company may own it, but if it's significantly, every activation is due or controlled by the owner or the brand owner or any of the stakeholders as well, ownership's irrelevant. If it can't happen without somebody else's approval, they effectively own that content. What are the limits on the territories? What needs to be cleared by way of underlying rights? People enter into a very complex bundle of intellectual property rights or personality rights or endorsement rights, all of which need to be cleared. Now, this may seem to be a very interesting legal and academic issue, but the truth is money. Each of those clearances requires a separate negotiation, and as night follows day, is going to cost you something. Who's going to have ultimate control? What happens at international? And is every deal really about the future business model? My take on this is actually we should just take each deal on a step-by-step basis, on a non-precedential basis. It takes the heat down in the negotiations and allows the parties, in my view, to be a lot more brave and look at it as a new endeavour. You can always do the next deal better, but you don't have to treat every deal as if it's the last deal.
And so when we come to roles and responsibilities, the first major issue is the fact that the brand is normally seen as the driving force. The idea may have come from the content provider, but the brand teams, the brand organisation are normally seen as the people who are going to manage it and are going to push it through. So that immediately sets us at a slightly imbalanced situation. And as a brand team, you want to do something that's innovative. You want to take something new to market that certainly your competitors haven't done, and preferably no one else in the marketplace has done. And so there's always a load of opinions. We're not short of opinions. Even within Bacardi, we're not short of opinions. We don't need more opinion. We need expertise and we need insight. And so having all of the people responsible for delivering the activity in one room, we normally have too many experts, not enough action. And once you work through clarifying who does what, where the handoffs are, it takes so long, or in our experience it's taken so long, that virtually the deal and the activity is all the way through before that definition and that clarity exists. And whilst you're working through that process, dare I say it, there are a lot of egos in the room, and normally those egos will struggle with understanding and accepting where those handoffs are. So who's responsible for delivering what, who's not responsible for it. I've made the phrase before that you require certainly UN levels of diplomacy to make sure that everyone is happy with how you end up. And so from a brand point of view, to ease that process, to try and speed that up, there's a tendency to try and reduce the amount of people and reduce potentially the amount of expertise in the room, which is probably the wrong thing to do, but ultimately is one for expediency. And once you've got all of those roles and responsibilities sorted, you've still got the thorny subject of approvals. And approval for work, certainly within an organisation like Bacardi, and having spoken to many other brand owners on the same sort of subject, the approval process, neatly packaged down as it is right at the start of the process, inevitably becomes a much more convoluted and complex task once the content is actually produced. Your average CMO might be very interested in seeing the brief at the start, but they're very, very interested and will have a hands-on attitude by the end of it. And so making sure that that approval process is buttoned down is key, because if not, the time taken at the end of the process is enormous.
Now, I don't know that many of my clients, I do have a massive privilege of working for brand owners, for agencies, mobile companies, rights owners, record companies, many of the biggest in their field. They tend to involve some of the smartest people in the business or their particular sector. However, in the branded content world, there is often this issue that when people are entering into branded content deals, the issue of money and fees tends to be very much at a very high level. Big round numbers, often usually £1 million, which always makes me think of Austin Powers, if I'm completely honest, about how they do that. Yeah, it's £1 million deal, it's £1 million deal, often up ahead in a vacuum. Rarely do people ask, how does it break down? How is that going to be worked? Is it going to be tethered to milestones? What am I actually buying? So breaking down the fees, breaking down the budgeting process in the branded content issue may seem to be one level of detail too great, but it's where these deals fall apart and is key to our roadmap. And also those necessary costs for clearances, just budget them. In terms of my brand clients, all they want no surprises. They want to know it up front. It's going to cost this to clear this, it's going to be this to the activation. That's fine. Budget it, don't give me any surprises. But branded content deals like this contain too many surprises. Because of those surprises, it creates a difficult negotiation. And that difficult negotiation from an emotional and marketing perspective tends to lessen the enthusiasm for the deal and then ultimately activation. By the time it's gone, everyone wants to forget the branded content deal rather than actually celebrate it. And it often comes down to how the parties leave the room. And also, we need to be thinking about things like insurance and indemnity. It was a very simple transaction of X buying Y. Now, if we are talking about shared intellectual property or shared controls or split up roles and responsibilities, who's going to pay, who's going to insure, who's going to indemnify, has to be addressed head on.
We were slightly worried about the heading on this one, because procurement tends to be a dirty word within brand owners, and I'm assuming it's probably a dirty word amongst content providers as well. And I wanted to make sure right at the outset that this isn't just about cash. Cash comes into it, payment comes into it, of course, but it's not all about that. And the growing world of marketing procurement, of which I wholeheartedly support, appreciates that it's a value exchange. It's not just about money. And the key thing is understanding what each of the parties have to offer that is over and above just money and the content you provide. and defining those. Now this takes time, and it also takes an in-depth understanding of what you are providing, what you know, and what its value is to the other party. And so that time inevitably leads to a pinch point. But understanding that you guys will deliver insight to us as well as just the content is key to understanding who we want to work with. As we move on through the process of negotiation, defining what the deal is, getting into a situation where everyone is actually taking part in the risk, i.e. investment of their own time or potentially money in making sure it's a success, is a place that many brand owners want to get to, and Bacardi is no different in that. But historically, content providers have seen it very much more as a service deal where you pay, we deliver. In terms of how it changes consumers and consumer activity and consumer perception, I think having risk within that deal is exceptionally important and will feature moving forward. And the last point I'll mention on this is, if we don't gain that clarity, if we don't understand what you are delivering and what that value is to the other party, then it's virtually impossible to understand at what point is that unbalanced. Because if you continue to walk into a deal that is fundamentally unbalanced, that deal may take place in the first instance, but it will not lead to a long-term relationship. So we'll come back to the situation that Cliff referred to, the hypothetical situation that Cliff referred to, because that's never happened for Bacardi, obviously, where at the end of the deal, we look to evaluate it, and it hasn't worked. For whatever reasons, it hasn't worked, and we'll never do that again. And that's where you throw a good idea out with a bad execution, because fundamentally it was unbalanced, we weren't aware of exactly what the value delivery was, and we never walked away from the deal. Walking away from the deal, for me, isn't a huge negative, it's just understanding when it's unbalanced and therefore won't deliver what you want for the business.
So, having spent a very long time talking about where these things go wrong, and having given this quite a lot of thought, this is our view of the optimal roadmap. That actually we shift the pieces around on the deck and end up with a very different view to coming together and creating a branded content piece or AFP or brand partnership. We think that instead of relevance coming towards the end, that actually understanding the relevance of the branded content to the brand leads to a perfect distillation of the objectives. The parties will then understand why are we doing this and what do we want to achieve. Once you've got those objectives clear, you can then start to commission the idea. The idea then understanding that actually when we come to this point that we start with the rights instructions, say, right, we now have the idea, you then go to the experts and say, create the deal, structure the deal, identify the issues before we enter the procurement process, long before. And this is the key issue. Please, 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 can we start now saying that we're going to think ahead rather than agree things in a vacuum without understanding our endpoints, because that's where these deals are falling off the road. And then what we can do is focus on the execution. Now, some of you may be thinking, look, come on, just paper the deal, or, you know, this stuff isn't difficult, just make it happen. But there are times when I ask my clients, what rights do we want? What do we want to achieve? What's really, really important to us? What is our walkaway position? What do we want to do? How can we tether the fees to the milestones? How can we make sure that we aren't held to ransom further down the road? How do we make sure we've got access to insight? Is this a data play? Is this a content play? Is it a revenue play? I can structure all of those deals for you, but only when you've been through that process of understanding the relevance, the objectives, and then commission the ideas, and started to identify the structures up front before you enter the procurement and negotiation process. So we're going to break that down into those headline points and chat them through.
So if I was talking to a content provider and I was going to give them some advice in terms of how to best talk to us as brand owners, then these are some of the questions, these are some of the points that I would want you to raise. I want you to get under the skin of the brand. And in that one sentence, there's a huge amount of background information. So as a brand owner, we should we do, certainly Bacardi, I won't speak for the wider world, but certainly within Bacardi, we understand our brands. We spend a huge amount of time and effort and money understanding intimately what our brand means, what our brand's point of view is, and how our brand relates to the consumer, our target consumer. So we have a huge amount of knowledge that we are more than happy to share with whomever we're going to work with to help understand intimately what the brand is and make sure that that brand is a person in the room. If you're working on a project with a brand owner who cannot articulate that for you or is unwilling to articulate that for you, then you're immediately got one arm tied behind your back. There may be reasons behind it, but more concerningly, if they can't tell you that, then perhaps they don't know. And if they don't know, they will struggle to understand whether the idea that we're talking about is going to be relevant and effective. Now, there are many brands out there who will still continue to do relatively shallowly thought out pieces of activity, and that's their call. From Bacardi's point of view, for us to get really engaging and really relevant content, we need you to understand our brand, and we will spend time articulating it. We also need you to understand what your idea, your platform, your property stands for, what its personality is, what is it going to deliver, why does it engage with its audience. Now, hopefully, if you know those two pieces of information, where they cross over will be greater rather than lesser. So if we have aspects of our brand personality and you have aspects of your property and they knit perfectly together, that sweet spot is what we're interested in. And if that sweet spot is unique for our brand and no other brand could do it, then suddenly we're very, very engaged and very, very interested in that content. Moving onwards, you need to be acutely aware of what we're trying to do with our consumers. What shift are we trying to deliver in terms of behaviour, in terms of attitude, in terms of reinvention, whatever it's going to be, we need to articulate that and you need to understand it. Because unless you know what we're trying to do, and unless we can set that up as an effective target, then we can't expect you to engage in that and we can't expect you to take some of the risk and reward that I spoke to before. And if you have objectives you want to deliver out of this, as I said before when we were talking about the negotiation, it's about a balance here. It's about us understanding what we can deliver to you as well as you deliver to us. Then you need to be able to articulate those requirements to us as well. Once we know those and intimately understand exactly what those are, and they're relevant to our two businesses, then the objectives come out and then they're clear for all sides. So there are a handful of questions there that you should expect to have answered by your brand.
Now, with regard to structures and rights, I put some broad themes up here rather than gone through in intimate detail. Dependent on the deal that you're doing in sport, music, fashion, people don't think of things like the copyright in the ownership of a dress is actually a creative work and a piece of art that may necessarily need to be cleared. All of those issues can be cleared, but they can only be cleared if they can be identified. They can only be negotiated through when you've identified them up front and budgeted for them. It's when they come as a late surprise, they either hold a piece of content to ransom or they make a party fallout. That's what we need to address in these deals. I also think that there is too much of an obsession on the rights you don't have rather than the ones you do. There is in my view, you take a 360-degree view of the rights you can get and work out how to exploit them in a transmedia way, rather than focusing on, I must have 100% of everything. One of my colleagues always describes that part of the negotiation like bald men fighting over a comb. You know, there seems to be a lot of heat, light, and energy expended on the things that you just don't need, when actually focusing up front what you do need means that the structure, the deal, the budgeting will follow very importantly. Now, this is the point that Adam was talking about as well, but understanding of what is fundamental. Is it fundamental that the production company only wants the format rights? Is it the most important thing that the brand actually isn't so much interested in the televisual? They're actually interested in what they can use for their own entertainment hub or what they can use for their own corporate videos, or what's an internal reward for their regional managers. Or maybe the most important thing is that Perry Katie does a PA at the annual sales conference. It can be at any point in the spectrum, but understanding what is the most important thing in relation to all of the stakeholders means that the deals absolutely fly. And the other thing I would say is that when you can actually understand what those pinch points and those fundamental points are, you can start to value it. You can start to examine what the return on investment would be. You can also tether the payments to the agency, to the production company, to the talent, to the broadcaster, based upon the achievement of those outcomes. Rather than we're all in this world of branded content looking for a new currency. And ultimately, maybe there will be one. At this moment in time, I think the currency that's most important is what is the most important thing for your brand, your artist, your rights. If we can value those, we can measure them. If we can measure them, we can make them KPIs and milestones.
So we've worked our way through defining what both parties want. We understand the objectives. And certainly the rights that we're talking about. Assuming that that is all done perfectly, then actually the negotiation, the value exchange, if we need to balance that up with money, is pretty swift. And that allows us to do some other things. It buys us time to do the things that we should do. Buys us the time to exercise a little bit of best practice. We have an element of certainty. Everyone goes into the deal knowing with their eyes open, and that in itself means that there's trust. If we have time on our hands, then we can start to concentrate on some of the things that get left behind, some of the higher order aspects. I put some down there, but there are so many others. But where we get time to actually talk about how, if we're dealing with an artist, there might be some creative collaboration. We talk about how we manage the reputation, or keep the reputation management side of things square. So we make sure that what we believe, what the artist believes, absolutely knitted together. And importantly, we start to understand how, if the program starts to change, so for instance, if we're using an artist to appear at certain events, and those events turn out to be ineffectual at a consumer level, and we want to change that, we want to change the way that the mechanic works, then we can do so, we can discuss how that might happen as part of the negotiation, as opposed to just making sure that the bare minimum is there. And finally, we can review the objectives, certainly upon delivery, and make sure at the end of the deal that everyone got everything that they expected out of it. Review is a struggle for many brands, because we tend to start working on the next thing, the next big project, without spending time to actually assess exactly what did go right and didn't go right. And therefore, if we've got a long-term relationship with the content provider, it's important to make sure that that iteration goes into the next positive engagement.
The other thing I would say about the negotiation and procurement process as well is one of the classic things where they fall apart in branded content is exclusivity. A brand or an agency will walk into it doing a deal with a content provider, an artist, an IP owner, on the view that actually they're getting some level of exclusivity. What will happen, however, is that the rights owner, the content owner, will be, oh, this is my business, I can't possibly. It's another very big pinch point as well. So just as part of that process on focusing on the best practice, identifying the stakeholders and those issues and what's important to them also throws that out of the process. So the session today was about the roadmap. Where is the roadmap? Well, I can't say that there is one optimal deal structure. You know, no two deals are the same, particularly in this space as well. But what we are saying here is that if we are going to get brands to be focusing on the relevance and the objectives and the ideas, where do you turn to? So working with the BCMA, as Lewis Silkin does very closely as well, we have set up what we now call the roadmap sessions, where actually we will work with brands or agencies or procurement or broadcasters to have a session, fixed fee, discounted for BCMA members, where actually we will go through and give you a deal appraisal. You can take it or you can't. It's completely up to you in terms of understanding and identifying the opportunities, the threats, the structures, what do the parties want, and interrogate the deal before you enter the negotiation process, not afterwards. And also what we're trying to do as part of working with branded content is getting people to focus on the return on investment. One thing that we're hearing from the CFO and the CMO is, I can't measure it. I don't understand what I got out of it. I didn't understand the problems going in. And what we're hoping with these roadmaps is people to have at least a greater sense of where did we want to head to, where did we end up, and how do we value that gap and that value in terms of the branded content. Very expensive, very time-consuming. What did we get back? So we were asked to leave some time at this point to ask any questions from the audience. So both Adam and I will take any questions that you have.
Well, hi, my name is Lorenzo. I come from Portugal, where I have a small production company. What would you suggest to put in the contract with between the parties in terms of when a litigation arises? Some kind of arbitrage or BCMA, for example, or some other competent forum that is not a court, let's say, or something like that?
That's a very good question. Branded content is very much like a marriage or a partnership or a polygamous relationship, you know. Perhaps any fans of Big Love, I think it's probably a bit more like that, really. And nobody wants to enter a marriage talking about a divorce, which is my role, unfortunately. I'm doing the prenup, if I'm not torturing that analogy. So arbitration clauses and saying to people that their first resort will not be to litigation can be very attractive. Makes the parties realise, actually, we're not entering battle stations, we are working together. However, that assumes that your interests are aligned. So between a production company and a brand, that may make complete sense. But if you are dealing with a major rights owner or a broadcaster, whom you have paid a significant amount of money on the expectation of those things, then actually arbitration may not work for you. So that's a very long way of saying I would parcel out which rights or which concerns go to arbitration, so they may be to do with creative approvals or what is reasonable, and actually things that are possibly a little more black and white, like a warranty that IP is cleared for use, or that somebody has the rights to that there is an opportunity to go straight to law because there may be some instant damage. So what I would do is parcel out which things go to arbitration, which things may be litigated over, and actually understanding that, you know what, not everything is the same. You may not have the same dispute every time in relation to a particular relationship. Any more?
Can I ask, did everyone get that? I did, but I'm assuming that probably the noise came. When you say associated with each other, in what way? As in non-competitors?
I'm talking about if you're a broadcaster and you want to work just with a group of brands, is that attractive to them because they gain from being associated with each other as well as with the channel?
Yes, in theory, absolutely. Co-brand, we have a history of co-branding, normally within promotional mechanics, I have to say, rather than content. But yes, I think there has to be a watch out. I think there has to be a symbiosis of between the brands. If one is piggybacking on another, then inevitably there will be some sort of disproportion to the deal. I think if the brands stand for a very similar thing and have a similar personality, then absolutely. The more simple it is for the brand owners to understand, the better. I think as a content provider, if you're bringing brands together, if you're acting as an introduction service to further labour cliffs relationship metaphor, then I think understanding, once again, coming back to my point about understanding what the brand personalities are and making sure that those matches are right, is pivotal to the content provider. But yes, is the short answer.
Can I just answer to that point as well? I think that, I've said it before and I'll say it again, no surprises. I have seen deals that actually, if the parties are up front, that actually, do you know what, I understand that you, Mr. Mobile Phone brand, will want sector exclusivity, as it were, but then being cute and further down the line, and a handset manufacturer realises that they're also dealing with a network operator that they weren't told about, then trust can, even if it hasn't been covered off in the agreement, or even when it has been covered off in the agreement, it's the surprise. Then you say to them, well, why didn't you say? And say, well, you know, we needed other brands in order to sponsor this content. You say, well, look, we've got a strategic relationship with other brands. We work with these other brands on a whole series of activations. If you had told us you wanted to work with another partner or it to be co-branded, we could have helped you deliver that. So I think that it's about this transparency and openness that actually means that you can achieve the thing and everybody wins, rather than the rather diminished point of view of, oh, I didn't realise they were involved too. And I have seen those situations, and I know they can be extremely damaging. One final question?
My name is Miro. I run a production company in Bulgaria. I recently had the following problem. There was a client that wanted to invest in branded content, and we developed the concept for a show which was especially targeted for the client, and it was in line with its DNA as far as branding comes. But the broadcaster told us, when we went to the broadcaster, that we are actually buying 1 hour of advertising 30 times. And the structure of the deal was just, it couldn't happen. Did you have such problems, and how do you wrestle such problems with the broadcaster? How do you convince the broadcaster it's actually content and not an hour of advertising?
You've hit on a very interesting point. I mean, I can't talk to your particular territory, but one of the issues with branded content is that within broadcasters, I would venture, there isn't a unified view as to what branded content means. So there are people who see it as a 1 hour advertisement. There are commissioning people who, from a very creative point of view, see all of branded content as a compromise too far, that even though they're a commercial broadcaster, they didn't enter this world in order to commission 1 hour adverts. And it's a very difficult situation and point. How it would have, and now my view is that you don't speak to the broadcaster at the end, you speak to the broadcaster at the very beginning. As part of speaking and identifying who the stakeholders are, the broadcasters who are actually going to play it out and deliver the most amount of value have to be brought to the table at the very beginning, rather than being sold a pretty package with a bow on the top and saying, here you are, please take this. If you can work out what they are after, which isn't actually, do you know what? I'm not going to sell it as an advert. I'm going to sell it as a solution to my problem. I need a 1 hour documentary to do with green tech, or I need a 1 hour lifestyle program that's really going to do it, but I want it to go at this particular day part, and I want it to have this piece of talent. You can start to create a win-win situation. But delivering a deal delivered as a concept and finalized is very difficult to sell, because then it says, this is an advert, I can't influence this. You purely want to use my airways as inventory, and therefore I'm going to value it that way.
And I think just to build on that, I think that's one of the areas that brands historically will be ignorant of. Obviously, some brands are getting into their own commissioned content and trying to sell it in. I think their media partners, every brand will have a media agency somewhere along the line, whether it's a Group M, etc., etc. Understanding whose responsibility it is right at the outset to make sure that this content is sold in and whose responsibility it isn't is critical to therefore making sure that who gets left holding the baby if it doesn't happen as well, because I sense behind that is, well, everyone's looking at the other person as to whose responsibility it was that we've just got content that isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, my red flashing light here says that our time is up. You've been very patient. Thank you very much indeed. and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.
Thank you.